Welcome to lesson 4, and today we're going to talk a bit about hydrometers, refractometers, and sugar content in the wines. We're going to talk about wine clubs and a couple other things that we're going to cover today. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail on some of the measurements that we do in winemaking. We've covered this a little bit in the past, but as we go through this course, we're going to keep going more and more into detail as we go through it, so we don't overload you with information all at the beginning. And then the important things that we're going to talk about, we're going to keep reinforcing those concepts. So sugar content is measured to determine how much sugar is in our must. Now, it's really important that we know how much is in there, because you want to be able to track that through that fermentation process. So you're tracking it at the beginning, and then you're measuring it as you're going through that fermentation process to make sure that your fermentation is going correctly. Now with kits, the sugar isn't quite as important because it's already balanced for you. If you're making wine out of kits, or not kits, out of juices or grapes or fruits, the sugar becomes a lot more important, because in some cases you're going to have to add sugar for the fruit wines. And you want to make sure you know how much you're adding, because you don't want to add too much, because you want to keep them in the right alcohol range. So it's really important that you measure the sugar content of your must to start with. So the device that we use for measuring sugar content, typically in winemaking, is a hydrometer. And it's this little guy here. Now, even the professional winemakers, with all the fancy equipment they've got, this is one of the devices that they'll also use. This is a triple scale hydrometer. We're going to go into that a little bit later, but it's really handy to, when you purchase one, get one with the 3 scales on it. So this doesn't measure sugar content. What it does, it measures the density of the liquid that it's sitting in. Now, for the most part, wine juice or fruit juice, the majority of that density is related to sugar. So for our purposes, we can just pretty much say that this is going to measure how much sugar is in that must. The way you do that now is we fill the cylinder, we fill that up with must up to about here, and then we put this in there, and we want to make sure that the must is relatively clean. If you're making it out of fruit or out of grapes, you don't want to have a lot of grape skins or particulate matter floating around in there, because that is going to affect the density of your liquid, and it's going to affect your actual specific gravity that you're measuring. If a kit comes with a skin pack, like the red wine kit that we made, what you want to do there is you also want to make sure that you move that around. We put it into a bag to reduce the mess. Some people put it into the bag, some people just dump it in there. No matter what you do, you want to move it around in that juice, because there's a lot of dissolved sugars inside those skins, and that is going to affect your specific gravity as well. And you'll notice when we did measure our specific gravity on day 2, from when we measured it on the first day, it actually went up on us. And that's because those dissolved sugars in those skin packs got into the wine more, into the must. So lower the hydrometer into the liquid and allow it to settle, and read the value right at eye level. Now, when you're reading specific gravity, as you're going down on the scale, the numbers actually increase. So if you can see the number is 0.990, and it's a little bit, and there's some lines underneath that, that's actually higher than 0.990. So that would be 0.994 or 2 or 6 or 8. So as you're going down in the scale, the specific gravity goes up. And I've seen some people where they read it the other way, and that's the wrong way to read it. When you put it in the liquid, when it's fermenting, you're going to put it in there and you're going to look at it going, oh, my specific gravity is 1.090, for example. And then all of a sudden you're going to watch it going, oh, no, it's 0.092. No, it's 0.094, 0.096. What's happening there? The bubbles in the fermentation are attaching onto the hydrometer, and it's raising it up. So when that happens, just give it a good spin in there, or pull it out and put it back in, and measure the specific gravity right away. If you let it sit in there too long, those bubbles are going to form, and it's going to raise it up and give you the false reading. The other device out there that can measure sugar is called a refractometer. Now, that is primarily used in the vineyards by the viticulturists who are actually growing the grapes. Sometimes a winemaker will use them in the vineyard too. And the nice thing about a refractometer is it only needs 1 drop of juice. So you don't need, for here, you're going to need a fairly significant amount of juice to fill that up. So if you're in a vineyard, you'd have to crush a couple clusters to get enough juice to fill that up. So it measures the sugar content, but you only need one grape. And what happens, you put one piece of juice or one drop of juice in there on the prism, and the light goes through it, reflects like in a prism. That's kind of how you get rainbows and stuff. Well, what happens then, you just read off the scale where that refracting is taking place, and it'll tell you what the Brix value is. So refractometers measure in Brix. So one degree of Brix is equal to 1 gram of sugar in 100 grams of solution. That's what that measurement actually means. So a refractometer is not recommended for monitoring your fermentation, because as soon as you get alcohol in there, it's going to mess up the calibration of that refractometer. So it's not going to be accurate anymore. Now, there are tables that you can use to convert it, but why bother when you can spend $10 and get one of these? If you had a vineyard, you're going to want a refractometer just to check the ripeness of your grapes. After that, once you're making wine, you want one of these. If you look at this scale here, this scale is calibrated in a specific gravity. There's also a Brix scale on there, and then there's a potential alcohol scale on there. You can actually read straight across. These are calibrated scales with each other. Now, if you look at the formulas that we've done here, there is a problem with this formula. Sean picked it up. I forgot to add in the conversion factor for it. But to convert the specific gravity to alcohol, you take alcohol by volume equals your original starting specific gravity minus your finished gravity multiplied by 131.25. So if it starts at 1.090 and ends at 0.995, that gives you an alcohol content of about 12.5%. Kind of a typical value for white wines, okay? Anywhere from 12.5 to maybe 13.5% for your whites. That is pretty much typical. If you look at the bottles, that's pretty much where they all fall in. There's going to be exceptions, but most of your white wines fall within that range. The red wines are going to be higher. They can go up. They typically start around 13%, and then they can go up to about 15.5% on some of them. To convert the Brix to alcohol, that is you take your Brix value times it by 0.59. So if your Brix is 21.5 times 0.59, that's 12.68%. And to convert the specific gravity to Brix, you take your specific, and this is an approximation. The exact formula is a lot more convoluted than that. You can look it up on the internet if you really want to. For our uses here, and for most winemaking purposes, that's the approximation is close enough for us. So you take your Brix equals your specific gravity minus 1, times it by 1,000, and divide by 4.
So you can see why you want to get a triple hydrometer.
Yeah,
So you don't have to do anything.
exactly. And that was my next point.
Just done for you.
To convert your Brix to specific gravity, that's your Brix divided by 258.6 minus your Brix divided by 258.2 times 227.1 plus 1. So again, after seeing all these formulas, I wonder how many of you are thinking, geez, I should just go and spend $10 and go buy one of these. So then the next question is, why not use a Brix meter? Well, because it's only calibrated with sugar. As soon as you add an alcohol in there, that screws up that calibration. It's no longer accurate anymore. Now there's conversion factors that you can apply to it, but they're like $100 and this is 10.
They start making your eye twitch.
Yes.
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 Specific to grape juice.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So these hydrometers are made for winemaking,
Sounds good to me.
wine and beer making.
So that's good for sugar, water solutions.
Yep.
If you do other types of solutions, that is not the tool for it.
Okay.
And the good thing about grapes is, like Rick said, they're mostly sugar.
You're using grape must, and you've crushed it, and it's sitting in there, and you go to try to get a juice sample. There's so much pulp and everything else in there. When you go to measure your specific gravity, you put this in there, and it's like it just sort of sits there, and then you push it down, it stays there. You push it here, it stays there. So you can pretty much pick whatever you want. So you have to let that juice settle, and what'll happen then is you put it into a larger container. All that pulp will settle down in a few hours, and then you can actually take the clean juice off of that, and then you can check your specific gravity with that. But if you got to let that juice settle a little bit with that red when you first crush your grapes. If you don't let it settle, there's too many dissolved solids in there, and it makes this thing pretty much useless. Okay, let's talk a little bit about wine varietals. The only reason we're going to talk about wine varietals at this point is because when you go to buy your kits, they come in all different varietals. So when we talk about wine varietals, what varietal wines is a wine made out of a specific grape variety. And a grape variety is something like Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Cab Franc. Those are your common red varietals. And it's made from a single one. Now, each grape varietal has distinct characteristics to it. So we're going to cover a few of these off today. But if you're looking at kits, you can go and do some research on the internet, look up different kits and going, geez, I've never heard of this variety before. Just Google it on the internet and it's going to tell you what the varietals of those different grape varieties are, what those characteristics are. It's going to tell you what to expect for flavors.
So around here, we're saying Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, Malbec, Pinot, Merlot, Shiraz, Zinfandel. Those are really common ones. The other good thing about with varietals is you kind of got some idea what you're getting. So we're going to take a couple. So Cab, bold structure, high tannins, deep flavors, black currants, tobacco, cedar, depending on how it was, what the vintner did to it. Benefits from oak aging, and you get complexity. For whites, we have your typical Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Viognier, Pinot Gris, and yours was a Pinot Gris Viognier mix. Yeah, and Viognier is known for that aromatic. It's just amazing.
And floral notes.
And the floral notes are just like so much. Red wine blenders will put Viognier in to pull the nose up. You've done some of that too.
Yeah. Well, it's a really great pairing with Syrah.
Yeah.
And you only need anywhere between 5 to 8% of it. That's it.
It's crazy. It's
And it makes a huge
unbelievable
difference.
How little you can put in, and it'll just open it right up.
When you're blending wines, you can use anything from
Anything.
15 years old, and you can put that into a wine that's a year old. Because you're looking for certain characteristics that you want to improve your wine, your current wine. It's usually because it's missing something. So this is actually kind of a good segue into our next topic, which is elevating winemaking from kits. So many winemakers start with the kits, but they're seeking ways to enhance their wines. And so here's some ways to improve the kits. So you can do tannin additions for your red wine kits. Most of the red wine kits, these goes right back to the whole intent for these kit manufacturers. They're making kits that they want them to be ready in a couple months, that you can bottle them in a couple months, and then people want to drink those things within another month after that. So they make them fairly soft in tannins. Well, what that does, that tends to give those wines a little bit of a sweet edge to them. And with red wines, tannin additions can help mask that perception of sweetness. So with the kit the red wine kit, and I did taste it, there is a bit of residual sweetness in there, or a perception of sweetness, because the tannins aren't really that dominant, and it is a cab, so it should have more tannins. So when we go to bottle it next week, we're gonna add some tannins to that, and we're gonna do some bench trials and let you taste the difference of what it tastes like without the tannins, and then with tannins in there. So that's one of the things that you can do. So tannins can be added in. They provide structure, mouthfeel, and aging potential. So red wines with tannins, that gives that wine longevity. And you can have grape-derived tannins. You can have powdered tannins, such as a tannin complex, and that'll add structure. And there is both finishing tannins and fermentation tannins. So when we add it after the fact, we're going to be adding in the finishing tannins. Those are after the fermentation is done.
Yeah, I found it quite challenging to have some juice. We just pressed off the juice, and you taste it, say, that needs tannin. That's a really hard thing to know.
It is experience.
If to put it in, should it go in at the beginning? Because I think it's better to put the tannins in at the beginning.
In some cases, yes. If you're the other thing that tannins do is they retain color. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you put the tannins in right at the beginning, we're getting a little bit more into the more advanced winemaking stuff here. But if you put it in at the beginning, what happens then is you get that structure from the wine. It builds that structure up. It gives you the body of that wine, and it also increases your color stability of the wine. So in wines that are typically light in colors, such as Pinot Noirs, they may add a lot of that finishing tannin up front, and it's way more than that wine actually needs. And then what they do is they remove it at the end after the fermentation is done. So now they have that good color stability. They've got the good color in there, and all they do is remove some of those tannins afterwards. So it gives you the best of both worlds by adding it at the beginning, because then you can control how much. By removing, you can remove what you want.
How do you take the tannins out post fermentation?
We're getting way too.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. But
I was gonna ask that.
yeah, there's other products that you can use for it. Egg white findings is one of them. Isinglass is another one. There's a number of different products out there that will remove tannins from the wine.
Even some of the cleaning stuff, even bentonite can take out.
Yes,
some of the tannins.
bentonite takes out tannins too, and that's why it's not. Again, we go back to what these kits. The kits are made so that they're ready quickly, and they're really rushing that process along for the red wines. And when you do that, they're saying add the bentonite in there because they want it to clear quickly for you. Because most people don't have a filter. Well, without that bentonite, it's not going to clear very good. But what's happening, that bentonite strips out a lot of the tannins in there too. So it's a double-edged sword. It's ready to drink quicker, but by extending those times and leaving the bentonite out of the red wine kits, we put it in because we are pushing the boundaries on these kits too. It's only a 5-week course, and we're making a kit in 5 weeks. So we're pushing the limits a bit on these kits to begin with. So we added the bentonite in there. If I was making that for myself, I wouldn't put the bentonite in there, and I would just extend the time frame out to make that wine over a 4-month period instead of a 4-week period. So there's time frames that you can stretch, and there's time frames that you shouldn't stretch. So the one that you shouldn't stretch out is the one where you're racking off the gross lees. So that's your first racking, and that they're saying to do it after a week. I would recommend you push that to 2 weeks, wait until the fermentation is complete, and then take it off of there. Wait until your fermentation is completely finished, and then take it off. You can leave that up. You can leave it on the gross lees on the red wines for about a month without any ill effect. The white wines, not so much. You maybe want 3 weeks for a white wine to get it off those gross lees. But after that, you can stretch out those time frames as long as you want after that.
Okay. Can I ask a question about that? Because we're at this point right now. So we've racked it once.
Yes.
This was the sort of in the email I was asking you. Now it's cleared out and we've got the lees on the bottom.
Yes.
This is a red?
No, it's a white.
White.
So I'm supposed to leave that now for a few weeks so that it hardens and then rack it off again.
Yes.
So it's not sitting on those for any longer.
Yeah. So with
Okay.
white wines are more susceptible to being on the gross lees. Red wines, there's so much other flavors in the reds that that little bit of nuttiness in there would just get absorbed in there and you wouldn't even be able to taste it.
Okay.
But the white wines tend to be a little bit more fruity and they're a little bit more delicate. So any fault in a white wine shows up big time, where the reds, the big heavy reds, they can hide the faults can hide in there and you can't even find them. Okay, so the other thing that we can add in there for your tannins is oak. And that oak can come in, and I'm talking like the oak chips. So oak comes in 2 main varieties, American oak and French oak. There's a few other ones out there, but those are the 2 dominant ones in the industry. So the American oak is more dominant, and that's where you're going to get those bigger oak aromas and flavors. It's more suitable for the big reds. And then once you get into the French oak, it's more subtle, and that's more appropriate for those lighter bodied reds. Like the Pinot Noirs would be French oak, and a Cab or a Syrah would be American oak. But you could use French oak in all of them, but you wouldn't want to use American oak in a Pinot Noir, for example. Oak can come in the form of oak powder, oak chips, oak cubes, and even oak barrels
Staves.
and staves. And oak can add complexity to the wine in form of vanilla, clove, smoke, coconut, cedar, etc. So we've talked about what we can do with reds. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do with whites. So we can do acid adjustments in white wines. Most of the white wine kits they're a little bit soft on the acid side. They're easy drinking, and they're meant to be drank quickly. And if you add some acid in there, they're going to go from more of those social type drinking wines to more of a food friendly wine. And most wine kits already has that acid in balance, but it's always usually on the soft side. So when I made the same kit that we're making in the course, we added about 0.75 grams per liter of citric acid to it, and it really bumped that wine up. So we can play with that when we're next week when we go to bottle. We'll do some bench trials with it and let you taste some wines with different acids in there to see what it tastes like. You can add citric acid to whites, but you don't want to add citric acid to reds. And the funny thing is, when we talked on the reds, we talked about the tannin can mask sugar in reds. It's the acid that masks the sugar in whites. You can't mask, if you add acid to a red, it's just going to make it more acidic. It's not going to get rid of that perceived sense, that perceived sweetness in there. But adding the acid to the whites, it does get rid of that perceived sweetness. It's really weird how it works. Okay, this takes us into yeast selection. We've talked a bit about how to rehydrate yeasts. We've talked a little bit about the yeast and their nutrient requirements. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the different yeast varieties that are out there. Now the importance of yeast in winemaking really can't be overstressed, because without yeast, we won't have wine. So there are literally hundreds of different yeasts out there that are suitable for making wine. And the Scott Labs handbook, and it's a description of that, or a link to that is in our description of the video down below. In the Scott Labs handbook, there is a guide that helps you with yeast varietals. It has the varietals listed on the yeast varietals on the left, and on the bottom it's the grape varietals. And in that table there'll be different categories with different stars in there, and it will rate those yeast on their suitability for the different wine varietals. So in addition, between yeast being suitable for a different wine varietal, there is also a multitude of different characteristics that those yeasts provide in the wine. Now, it's said that the yeast actually can contribute up to 20% of the aromatic and flavor profiles of a wine. So that alone is important to pick the right yeast for the right grape. Some yeasts can provide full-bodied wines. They add structure to the wines. They can actually even reduce some of those negative characteristics that happen in grapes that are unripe. So it's just a matter of searching through that guide and finding the proper yeast varietal that goes best with your grapes. Most of the wine kits out there are going to come with the EC 1118. That really is the workhorse of yeasts. It works under the widest variety of temperature conditions, pH conditions, sugar content. It is just almost a foolproof yeast. It has very little nutrient requirements, and it's a strong fermenter. So that makes it a very good choice for beginners starting out to use that yeast. The downside is it doesn't create a lot of varietal characteristics in the wine, but the advantages of it being such a reliable fermenter makes it worthwhile to consider when you're using it for making your wines. As you become more comfortable with your winemaking, then you can branch out and try some of those more specialty yeasts that produce those different characteristics in your wine. Let's talk a little bit about winemaking clubs now. I think this is a good place in the course to talk about this. Belonging to a winemaking club has a lot of advantages for the beginning winemakers. For one, it ties you into a community of experienced winemakers who will help you out. They can mentor you. There's the advantage of a lot of clubs will have winemaking equipment, or even their members have equipment that you can borrow as a beginner. It offers a social venue for you, and it offers an educational venue. A lot of wine clubs have a social component to it as well as an educational component to it. Some wine clubs will actually offer even educational seminars and workshops you can participate in outside of the meetings. Our wine club has a number of special events that we have. We have a summer barbecue, we have a Oktoberfest, and we have a Christmas event. In addition to that, we have guest speakers that come in. We have educational seminars that we put on for our members. We have workshops, technical workshops that we do. So you can see that the advantage of belonging to a wine club are many. Now, not all clubs are going to be the same, but hopefully from this, you're going to go away and maybe connect with some other winemakers, or maybe even form your own wine club. Who knows? Winemaking is both a science and an art. And by understanding the varietals, the refining techniques, and engaging with a supportive wine club, can help elevate your craft and produce exceptional wines. This completes Lesson 4 lecture video. The next video in the series will be the Lesson 4 practical video. In this video, we will explore hydrometers in more detail, specifically the triple scale hydrometer. We're going to talk about pH pens, and we're going to go over how to calibrate pH pens. We're also going to show you how to measure your total titratable acidity in a wine using a pH pen with a titrate of sodium hydroxide. So stay tuned, and thank you for joining us. The link in the top right-hand corner of your screen, that will take you to our playlist for the whole educational series on this winemaking course. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get future videos that are going to be coming out shortly. That'll be more of a specific educational topic. And if you like our videos, click like, because that really helps our channel to grow. And if you've already done this, just ignore the link and enjoy the rest of the series. Thank you for watching.